Who are the geniuses of the human realm? Given the monstrous talent of Grand I Divine Monarch, where would he rank? In this video, we'll delve into these details. Hello everyone, I'm Hanli. In my opinion, the strongest genius in the human realm is Ching Yuenzi. He is a pure sword cultivator, so pure that from chi condensation to void refinement, he carried no other magic treasures besides his flying sword. Generally speaking, cultivators practice existing cultivation arts, but Ching Yuenzi was different. He created his own. This cultivation art was indeed quite formidable, named the Ching Yuan sword art. Ching Yuenzi and Hanli both originated from the same human realm. Before ascending to the spirit realm, Ching Yuenzi left behind a sword Dao inheritance, the profound sword sect. However, after this sect declined, it was annihilated by the Yellow Maple Valley. The Yellow Maple Valley inherited a portion of the Ching Yuan sword art, while the other portion was scattered. It was only after Hanli coincidentally gathered all parts of the sword art that his grand saga of dominating the human realm unfolded. Furthermore, two terrifying details about Ching Yuenzi warrant closer thought. The first concerns the Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords. One must know that ancient cultivators from before the ancient devil invasion all used ancient treasures. However, the Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords were magic treasures, which seems to prove that Ching Yuenzi was not an ancient cultivator. Another detail is the number of layers in the Ching Yuan sword art. Ching Yuenzi left behind 13 layers of the sword art in the human realm, but these layers, at most, could only allow a cultivator to reach the mid-soul transformation stage. These two details also indicate that Ching Yuenzi was a cultivator who rose to prominence after the ancient devil invasion. At that time, the human realm's spiritual energy had declined due to ancient events, but not yet severely. Thus, in Ching Yuenzi's era, the cultivation limit in the human realm was the mid-soul transformation stage. This suggests that Ching Yuenzi's method of entering the spirit realm was most likely the same as Hanli's, smuggling himself over. Moreover, challenging opponents of a higher realm is usually the protagonist's exclusive achievement. When Hanli ascended to the spirit realm, he discovered that legends of Ching Yuenzi's realm-defying challenges were widespread throughout the spirit realm. Ching Yuenzi himself once stated that he could defeat void refinement cultivators while in the soul transformation stage, and in the void refinement stage, he could make integration cultivators wary. However, it's clear that wary was Ching Yuenzi being modest, because the demon monarch blood robe from the abyssal lands once personally witnessed Ching Yuenzi, while in the void refinement stage, slaughter and integration stage existence. However, while Ching Yuenzi was traveling across the various continents of the spirit realm, he was once ambushed by a powerful enemy. Although he narrowly escaped with his life, his physical body was destroyed, and his soul was shattered and nearly collapsed. In this moment of crisis, he encountered a member of the Changyuan race. Ching Yuenzi then seized his physical body and, through soul fusion, managed to restore his nearly shattered spirit. However, as a result, although Ching Yuenzi's soul was restored, he now only possessed half of his original memories. The other half came from the Changyuan race member. In other words, the current Ching Yuenzi was merely half of his former self. He then changed his surname to Jiang and, after careful consideration, primarily cultivated the Changyuan race's cultivation art. He also began refining other weapons, leading to the official appearance of the heaven-reaching spirit treasure, 5 Dragon Sluice. After occupying the Changyuan race's physical body, Ching Yuenzi, in a very short period, went from void refinement to breaking through to the integration stage, and smoothly advanced to the grand ascension stage shortly after, becoming the human race's 1.5th grand ascension cultivator. After Hanli entered the spirit realm, he coincidentally met Ching Yuenzi in the land of Mingi. Ching Yuenzi, sensing Hanli's Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords, was extremely excited, as this meant Hanli, like him, originated from the human realm and had also obtained the Ching Yuan sword art. Hanli was originally very confident in his flying swords because, in the human realm, he had added too many valuable materials, such as highly refined 10,000-year profound jade. Each of these, if taken out, would be priceless. But after Yuenzi examined them, he commented with 2 words, "all damn junk." He explained that if Hanli hadn't added these materials, his flying swords would have long since achieved sword heart sentience. Yuenzi originally intended to take Hanli as his disciple and impart the remaining Qing Yuan sword art, as well as the flying sword refinement method, to him free of charge. However, after Yuenzi discovered Yuan Yao possessed a special physique that could assist him in overcoming his heavenly tribulation, he only accepted Yuan Yao as his disciple. As for Hanli, since there was no actual master-disciple relationship, Yuenzi collected a certain remuneration before handing over the remaining sword art and refinement method to him. In fact, in the novel A Record of a Mortal's Journey to Immortality, relationships between people are very realistic. Hanli usually wouldn't help others without compensation, and even if he did, he would stop at the appropriate point. The same logic applied to Yuenzi here. After Hanli reached the Grand Ascension stage and his reputation resounded across various realms, he established a force named Qingyuan Palace. Just from the name, one can tell that this was definitely related to Yuenzi, or the Qing Yuan sword art. The second-ranked genius in the human realm is Ice Soul Fairy. Her era was earlier than Yuenzi's, as she was an ancient cultivator from the period of the ancient devil invasion. The Heaven-Mending Pill, the Void Heaven Cauldron, and the 1,000 Chaos Ice Flames that Hanli obtained were all left behind by Ice Soul Fairy. Moreover, in the Great Gene, she also established a sect in the north, the Northern Night Minor Extreme Palace. The Minor Extreme Palace's strength was quite powerful, comparable to the righteous and demonic top 10 sects of the Great Gene. Ice Soul Fairy's signature divine ability was the 1,000 Chaos Ice Flames, a power that came with her cultivation art. Therefore, the Ice Flame's power could continuously increase with her cultivation. However, Hanli only obtained the 1,000 Chaos Ice Flames in the human realm and did not cultivate the related art. Thus, if he wanted to enhance the Ice Flame's power, he could only do so through methods of devouring or fusion. After Ice Soul Fairy cultivated to the integration stage, she entered the Heaven Cauldron Palace instance. In fact, the Void Heaven Cauldron she left behind in the human realm was also related to the Heaven Cauldron Palace. Relying on the opportunities within the Heaven Cauldron Palace, Ice Soul Fairy successfully broke through to the Grand Ascension realm. However, due to the Heaven Cauldron Palace's restrictions and issues with its teleportation array, she had been unable to leave. Fortunately, before entering the Heaven Cauldron Palace, she had left some clues. Hanli had also received considerable favors from Ice Soul Fairy in the human realm. For example, besides the numerous treasures in the Void Heaven Cauldron, he also picked up hundreds of tons of 10,000-year profound jade from the Minor Extreme Palace. Therefore, after Hanli advanced to the Grand Ascension stage, he successfully rescued Ice Soul Fairy based on these clues. Thus, after Mo Jianli, Yuenzi, and Hanli, the human race finally welcomed its 3.5th Grand Ascension cultivator. The third-ranked genius in the human realm is Grand I Divine Monarch, a cultivator from 10,000 years ago. His cultivation was at the late nascent soul stage, and like Hanli, he originated from Tianan. At that time, the leading figures of both the righteous and demonic paths in Tianan were all defeated by Grand I Divine Monarch, making him the #1 cultivator in Tianan. However, he kept a low profile, so not many people knew his Divine Monarch title. Grand I Divine Monarch was most interested in puppetry, spending a great deal of time researching puppets. He even specifically established a sect dedicated to puppets, the 1,000 Machine Sect. Although Grand I Divine Monarch was devoted to puppetry, I believe his greatest achievement was the auxiliary cultivation art for controlling puppets, the Grand I Art. The Grand I Art could greatly increase one's spiritual sense. Hanli, who cultivated it, already possessed spiritual sense comparable to a nascent soul cultivator while in the core formation stage. After advancing to the nascent soul stage, his spiritual sense even surpassed those of the same realm. In the immortal realm, there was a similar spiritual sense cultivation art called the soul refining art. However, the soul refining art had many drawbacks. For instance, it could cause cultivators to go mad and self-detonate, and even affect one's sanity in their next life. But the Grand Eye art completely lacked these drawbacks. Not only that, it also had a very unique secret technique, the spiritual thorn. The principle of the spiritual thorn was to condense one's vast spiritual sense into a single point, instantly attacking the enemy's divine soul. This secret technique might sound a bit crude, but its effect was incredibly exaggerated. Those struck by it would, for a period of time, suffer from splitting headaches, losing all their abilities. Even late nascent soul cultivators, after being hit, would be hard-controlled for 2 to 3 breaths of time, roughly 7 to 8 seconds. Just imagine. If you lag for a few seconds during a team fight, by the time you recover, the game might already be over. Moreover, the spiritual thorn can be used not only on others, but also on oneself. Han Lai once used the spiritual thorn to free himself from negative states. In other words, this technique can not only control others, but also dispel control effects. To prevent himself from starving into chi deviation while cultivating, the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch also conveniently created a secret art, the Great Divine Law of Ghostless Possession. Later, Han Lai even used this secret art to temporarily control the malevolent chi within him. In truth, the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch's true genius lay in his comprehension. The reason he achieved success in the fields of puppets and divine stones was simply because he was interested in two-dimensional things. In my opinion, the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch could be called a true polymath. For instance, after seeing the refining formula for the 7-leaf fan, he comprehended a method to imitate it in a very short time. The 3-leaf fan that Han Lai refined using this method surprisingly possessed 40% of the original's power. From this, one can also see that the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch's comprehension is truly astonishing. According to the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch himself, not only was his comprehension exceptional, but his innate talent in the human realm was also second to none. However, having too many genius buffs stacked isn't necessarily a good thing. After all gifts bestowed by fate are secretly marked with a price. Precisely because the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch's innate talent and comprehension were both heaven-defying, his cultivation path was exceptionally smooth. He didn't realize the difficulty and importance of advancing in cultivation, so he always focused his efforts on researching external objects. As for his main cultivation, he only spent a small portion of his efforts and cultivated to the late nascent soul stage. It wasn't until his lifespan had only 200 years remaining that the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch realized the gravity of the problem. If he were in a realm with normal spiritual energy, with his innate talent, advancing to the spirit transformation stage in 200 years would definitely not be a problem. But after the human realm was invaded by the ancient devils, spiritual energy was extremely scarce. Even Han Lai, with the aid of the small green bottle and never getting distracted, still took over 500 years to break through from the late nascent soul stage to the spirit transformation stage. Therefore, 200 years was simply impossible for the Great-Eyed Divine Monarch. So he began to research alternative longevity arts. Finally, as his lifespan neared its end, a secret art unprecedented in history was born. It was the sacrificial god art, which allowed cultivators to abandon their physical bodies and entrust their divine sense and spiritual essence to a puppet, thereby achieving the effect of flesh withering, mechanical ascension. After performing the sacrificial god art, the puppet would inherit the cultivator's realm and cultivation. More importantly, through the sacrificial god art, those on the verge of death could live for another 10,000 years. The sacrificial god art is quite similar to ghost cultivation, but compared to ghost cultivation, cultivators who performed the sacrificial god art could still reincarnate. It can be understood as a path of ghost cultivation that, aside from making lewd acts difficult, has no other side effects. One must know that even spirit transformation cultivators only have a lifespan of 2,000 years. Spirit transformation cultivators in the human realm, in order to extend the shelf life of their lifespan, almost turn themselves into imperial cuisine. But even so, at most, they could only extend it by a few hundred years. However, the sacrificial god art directly surpassed them by 100-fold margin. The only pity was that because the great-eyed divine monarch's great tribulation was imminent, he only managed to perform half of the sacrificial god art. Although his divine sense successfully attached to the puppet, his cultivation was not inherited. This was quite awkward. Because he had no magic power or physical body, he couldn't even open the restrictions of his own immortal's cave. While trapped, the great-eyed divine monarch wasn't idle. He continued to delve into puppet arts and eventually truly researched a refining method for late nascent soul puppets. Although he had the method, given his current situation, he had no way to refine them. It wasn't until 10,000 years later, when Hanli came to find the great-eyed divine monarch, that, under their cooperation, the late nascent soul puppets finally appeared. However, the puppet's secret art of the great-eyed lineage required the integration of a startled soul to unleash the puppet's full power. Thus, the great-eyed divine monarch split his startled soul into two. One part was injected into the puppet, while the other part, carrying memories and emotions, resolutely froze itself. After the great-eyed divine monarch passed away, Hanli realized even more profoundly that even a figure like the divine monarch, if one's attention was diverted by external objects, would ultimately be unable to escape the fate of having their lifespan exhausted and turning into nothingness, let alone his own insignificant self. Therefore, the great-eyed divine monarch's influence on Hanli, besides imparting knowledge and skills, also served as a warning. Every time I talk about the great-eyed divine monarch, it's hard to stop, as his experiences are truly too legendary and dramatic. Let's compose ourselves and continue to the next one. The fourth-ranked genius in the human realm is Tion Chinger. Of course, saying Xian Ruying is also fine. After all, Tion Chinger is Xian Ruying's reincarnation. Many people might disagree with including these two, but in fact, their talent in array formations is indeed quite astonishing. First, let's talk about Xian Ruying. Although he possessed the dragon's roar physique, he, with only qi condensation cultivation, refined many astonishing array formations. Among them, the most famous was the reversed 5-star array, which was comparable to the grand protective arrays of immortal cultivation sections. Although Xian Ruying only created an array with 1/3 of its full power, this was already enough to threaten core formation cultivators. After Xian Ruying's death, Hanli unexpectedly discovered that when Siyue's daughter, Tion Chinger, also possessed the dragon's roar physique and was very talented in array formations. Thus, he suspected that Tion Chinger was very likely Xian Ruying's reincarnation. Later, when Tion Chinger visited Xian Ruying's former residence, she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Under the dual identities of a former acquaintance's reincarnation and a grape seed, Hanli agreed to help Tion Chinger treat her dragon's roar physique and took her as his disciple. Hanli was exceptionally good to Tion Chinger, to the point of being outrageous. For example, treasures and pills were all supplied in abundance. He even arranged for Tion Chinger to have rejuvenation water. One must know that rejuvenation water can directly extend one's lifespan by 1/3. Even spirit transformation old monsters would drool upon seeing it. Yet when Hanli gave Tion Chinger the rejuvenation water, he was merely a core formation cultivator. With ample pills and lifespan guaranteed, Tion Chinger subsequently began to focus wholeheartedly on researching array formations. By the time she reached core formation, her array formations had long surpassed Hanli's. For example, when Hanli smuggled himself into the spirit realm, he needed to use a spatial node. The node he found, however, was already on the verge of collapse. So he called Tion Chinger over, and even though spatial array formations were what Tion Chinger was least skilled in, she still devised a plan to reinforce the node under these circumstances. This bought Hanli a lot of preparation time, and it can be said that Tion Chinger was indispensable for Hanli to successfully enter the spirit realm. Before Hanli and Ice Phoenix smuggled themselves over, Ice Phoenix used her natal cold essence to remove the lingering troubles of Tion Chinger's dragon's roar physique, thus freeing Tion Chinger from her physique's burden. When Hanli became Heavenly Venerate Han in the spirit realm, he returned to the human realm once more. At this time, he learned that Tion Chinger had once cultivated to the late nascent soul stage. As her lifespan neared its end, she prepared to forcefully break through to spirit transformation, but her spirit and body were both destroyed. Fortunately, she had made some arrangements beforehand, protecting a wisp of her remnant soul, thus preserving the chance for reincarnation. In summary, the geniuses of the human realm each had their own specializations. For example, Ching Yuenzi excelled in the sword Dao, Bingpa excelled in military flames, the great-eyed divine monarch was fond of collectible figures, and Tion Chinger, on the other hand, excelled in array formations. While their overall standing might have been limited, the achievements they made in their respective fields were equally outstanding. Of course, among the 4 geniuses mentioned above, I didn't include Hanli's confidants, because if I did, Nangong Xiling, Yuan Yao, and Ice Phoenix are all top-tier geniuses. That would make it difficult to be fair, so please understand. Additionally, if you know of any other geniuses in the human realm, feel free to add them in the bullet comments or comment section, okay? That concludes all the content for this video. Like for boundless magic power, triple tap for tribulation transcendence, and becoming an immortal. Thank you for watching. I am Hanli, and I'll see you in the next video.